Your time. It is good to see you, as always.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Bob Turner, newly minted, man was sworn in yesterday, and you've already got a problem with him. So what is it?
Well, he was sworn in yesterday, and within a few hours, he was taking his first vote as a member of Congress, as my congressman.
Yeah.
And his first vote was a very substantial weakening of basic worker protections and really literally paving the door for companies to outsource jobs overseas. In a nutshell, Congress, the House of Representatives at least, voted yesterday along partisan lines to gut the National Labor Relations Board's power to prevent companies from retaliating against workers who want to exercise their rights. Boeing had picked up its operations from Washington and moved them to South Carolina in retaliation for their workers in Washington.
In alleged retaliation. Alleged retaliation.
Alleged retaliation, but
this is a lawsuit.
It is a formal complaint, which I don't think the NLRB makes lightly. Moved the operations over to South Carolina, allegedly, to punish workers for striking.
Right.
And the bill yesterday would prohibit the NLRB from ordering the Boeing to return those operations back to Washington if those allegations are proved true.
Okay, before we get to the politics of this, and there's a lot going on here, let's just say this. You could not possibly have been surprised by Bob Turner's vote, right? Because what we're talking here is protection of unions and union rights versus non-protection of unions and unions' rights. And he's a new Republican member of Congress. He said he would be bipartisan when he could, but this is a pretty standard partisan situation. You weren't surprised, right?
Well, separating the shock that now that I'm represented by a Republican member of Congress, which is something I've never experienced in my life. So
unless
I guess
you were alive in 1920, and you are remarkably well preserved.
Thank you. So putting aside that shock and just getting used to that for as long as I might have to be used to it.
Yeah.
Congressman Turner, when he was campaigning, did pledge that he was going to represent the interests of the people of Queens and Brooklyn and not vote on a party line. So I think this kind of vote is the one where he would have the opportunity to show that he's going to vote for the economic interests of Queens and Brooklyn. There are going to be other opportunities, I'm sure, in Washington where he can prove that he can toe the party line. But this was a pretty important vote for working people.
Well, it also could have been, going along the lines of your argument, it could have been a gesture, because really this thing is not going anywhere in the Democrat-controlled U.S. Senate, and it just, it would have been a way for him to demonstrate I'm not necessarily a part of the establishment. There were a couple of Republicans, I think, who did not vote with the party, but it was mostly a party line vote. So getting back to
I think there were 8 Republicans or 7 Republicans. So it really was a party line vote. So I guess that begs the question, Liz, on his first day in office in Washington, was he trying to make a statement to the leadership, the Republican leadership in the House, that he was going to be there for them, or was he trying to make a statement to the constituents back in Brooklyn and Queens that he was going to be there for us? And this was the choice, I guess, that he made yesterday.
So we should point out why this is important, because you were one of the folks who was actually interested in running for this particular seat, and now it indicates to me that you have something to say about it, that you are still interested in running for this seat, depending on what it looks like after redistricting. Am I right in that assumption?
Well, I'm interested in it for 3 reasons, I guess. The first is I'm a constituent. I live in the 9th District, and I'm used to seeing a congressman in Washington being a strong advocate for progressive issues, not for conservative Republican ones. So I've got something to say about that. Also, as you know, and we've talked about on your show, I chair a subcommittee in the Assembly on workplace safety. So issues related to workers' rights is very, very important to me. The third issue is whether or not there's going to be a 9th congressional district that looks like the one that Bob Turner is representing now down the road really remains to be seen. I know there's been a lot of talk about the district not existing, but if it does exist, and if the lines are similar to what they are now, I guess my name would come up again, as it did when Anthony Weiner resigned.
And you would consider it?
It's something that I would consider, because it's very, very important to me that I'm represented in the community that I represent in the Assembly now be represented in Washington by someone who shares those progressive values that I try to bring to office as a state assembly member.
You know, one might argue, and I know there's been a lot of talk about who's to blame, and David Weprin, and he lost, and he was the bad choice, etc. But one might argue that for you, this is actually a decent turn of affairs, because this district may not look the same, and you get to determine how it in fact is going to look by 2012, assuming it exists in some way, shape, or form, and Bob Turner's still there. You know, as you point out, you might have views that are more in line with some of the folks in the 3-to-1 Democratic district than his, possibly.
Well, I think you're giving me a lot of credit. I probably shouldn't say this on your show, but I'm probably not going to have much say in how those congressional lines are going to get redrawn. That's a little above my pay grade. But it certainly is very important to me that the person who represents my area in Congress, whether that's the 9th Congressional District or some other district after the lines get redrawn, represents the things that I'm trying to fight for in the state assembly, and that I'm used to having my member of Congress, whether it was Anthony Weiner or Chuck Schumer before him, or in a previous iteration of the lines, Nita Lowey, be an advocate for progressive causes and not an advocate for conservative ones.
Yeah, you know, another place where you're very outspoken is about Israel and the necessity in your mind for the U.S. to be a very strong ally. And do you think that, in fact, you might have fared better and had you been the candidate? And also, do you believe that Ed Koch was wrong in what he did?
Whether I would have fared better as a candidate or not is really very hard to say, because whoever is in the race creates a certain dynamic, and then it's hard to, you know, it's not as simple as putting a different person in the slot and then it's the same dynamic or same atmosphere. So that I couldn't say. I wouldn't want to speculate on. You know, I voted for David on election night, and I was genuinely disappointed that we lost this seat. You know, in terms of Ed Koch, you know, Ed and I go back a long way. Ed and I had written an op-ed when Senator Obama was running for president, which was critical of then Senator Obama's position on Iran, which is an issue that's very closely related to Israel. So I know this is an issue that Mayor Koch cares about deeply. I just think that had he reflected, and perhaps some of the people who voted for Bob Turner reflected on the fact that after the protest is made on September 13th, Bob Turner goes to Congress every day and has to vote on legislation. And I guarantee you, Ed Koch does not support the kind of bill, the kind of legislation, the kind of anti-union legislation, kind of outsourcing legislation that Bob Turner supported yesterday. Whether or not, in Ed's mind, the making of the protest on Tuesday was worth forgetting all the other progressive things that Ed Koch has cared about in his career, I guess that's for Ed to evaluate.
But writ large, do you believe that a message, some kind of message, needed to be delivered to the White House, and now maybe they'll get the message and in the minds of Jewish voters, stop taking Jewish voters for granted? It may be impossible for the president to improve his standing at this point. It's kind of late in the game.
I think there's no question that a message needed to be sent to President Obama. It's one that I've been trying to send myself since he was originally a candidate, and I'm very disappointed that it's one that he's not heeded, not necessarily because it comes from me, who I'm sure he's never even heard of, but as he can hopefully see from the results on Tuesday, which, by the way, would have been just a loud message had we elected David Weprin, whose views on Israel have always been terrific, and from a member of President Obama's own party, but I won't relitigate that election, as they say.
Right.
But a message needed to be sent, and I hope that the White House gets it, because I think it will be very difficult for President Obama to get the same share of the Jewish vote that he got in 2008 going into 2012. People in the community that I represent are very, very unhappy with the president's policies on Israel.
You know, before I let you go, Assemblyman, Elliot Engel, a congressman from the Westchester area, Bronx-Westchester area, who's also Jewish, suggested that he thought that the president would get the majority of the Jewish vote, but perhaps would see a drop as many as 10 to 20 points. That seems dramatic to me. Do you think it's really that bad?
I think that it is that bad, and I think that, as you see, this is going to be a very difficult year for Israel, starting next week with the vote on Palestinian statehood in the UN. The problems that Israel has with Turkey are only going to expand, and we continue to see Israel's isolation. Those of us in what I'll call the democratic pro-Israel community are not satisfied with the president's support for Israel in these very, very difficult times. And so the message that was sent on Tuesday, which again could have been sent just as loudly had we elected David Weprin.
I got your stance on that.
Is really, as you can see in the polls, starting to filter out beyond just the Orthodox community, beyond just that segment of the Jewish community that is very, very focused on Israel, and believe me, it's going to start to spread to the broader Jewish community. Not that the Jewish community is ever going to vote for Mitt Romney or Rick Perry in the majority, but enough that it could significantly hurt the president's chances in states like Florida and Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Well, interesting. Assemblyman Lancman, we are going to be keeping our eye on you. I think it's going to be pertinent when it comes to 2012. So in the meantime, though, I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us. It's always good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.